We start in 68 because we have to there, but I think we covered enough about the 60s, right? Now, 1 second. Okay, so here we go. Now, in 1968, the winner of the election, because famously LBJ uttered the words, "I will not seek the office of president," and Robert Kennedy is shot, and George Wallace is shot later on, Nixon wins. Now, Nixon wins in 1968 for two promises, and that was to end Vietnam and to continue civil rights. Now, he did neither of those early on. He does do something in Vietnam, but it's not until he's actually chosen for re-election. So, now here is our makeup of it. If you can tell, right? Nixon wins pretty handily. Wallace, who was famous for saying segregation now, segregation forever, while blocking the door of the University of Alabama, does carry the Deep South. And so you can see how that works. Okay? Now, the reason Nixon got elected was a group called the Silent Majority. Now, the Silent Majority basically says that people in the South who lived in the Sun Belt, who lived in the suburbs, were generally conservative and did not like all this hippie movement, and they would support Nixon. And famously, he went on and actually asked for their support, right? The great silent majority of America. Now, in the 80s, the silent majority becomes known as the moral majority when Reagan comes about, so we will get there as well. Now, they're basically saying we need to be heard, we need to be going. So the first thing we have is SALT 1, and I've got the wrong people here. I've got Carter here, and I apologize for that. SALT 1 stands for Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. It was actually Nixon, not Carter, okay? And so what happened here in SALT 1, they agreed to reduce the nuclear arsenals of their country. Major thing. This is the high point of detente of that relaxation that we talked about, okay? Now, if you remember, it wasn't actually Nixon doing all this, but a guy behind the scenes named Henry Kissinger. Right, and I skipped one here. Henry Kissinger had a plan that was called linkage, and basically it said we were too far apart from the Soviet Union, but we're going to link up with other countries who are not as intense Soviets, such as China and Vietnam, through trade, and then that would link us to the Soviet Union, okay? So that's linkage. Now what you need for Henry Kissinger, his title was Special Assistant for Foreign Affairs. He later becomes Secretary of State. And so what he did is he actually just listened to something going on. Famously, there was a guy, and it was not Forrest Gump, okay? But there was an American. He was ping-ponging in Japan. He got lost. He met a Chinese player. They made a friendship. And this Chinese team invited the American team to go and play ping-pong at China. The first Americans. Now notice this, there's no government backing here. This was a friendship struck up, okay? Nixon sees this, and Nixon actually says, we got to make it look like we're not trying to take advantage of it, but we do need to take advantage of it. We do need to jump on this. And so famously, Nixon will become the first president to visit communist China, or China for that matter, through something what is now called ping-pong diplomacy. Because of that ping-pong game, Nixon and Kissinger open a door, and they begin to get in there and start really consulting with China, and this is where our fascination with China and trading with them really begins. So ping-pong diplomacy was because of ping-pong. Nixon becomes the first man to visit China. Kind of fascinating, right? And yes, there was actually a ping-pong game, and famously, it's now said that the Chinese let the Americans win. So you can figure that one out. Okay, there's Nixon in China. Now, Nixon promised to end Vietnam. That's why he's elected. However, in 1969, he goes on TV and announces a plan to invade Cambodia. We're now spreading the war, not bringing it home. And that really annoys some people, and they start some protesting. We'll get in a second. So what happens here? The Christmas bombings. Over Christmas in 1970, we will bomb Cambodia. Now, we didn't bomb them on Christmas Day, but every other day we did. And so that's what's going on there. What was the idea going on? Okay. Now, out of that, we have two major protests. Two college campuses will protest what they called the expansion of the unjust war in Vietnam into Cambodia. And the first one takes place at Kent State, which is in Ohio. And they protested for 4 days. They actually buried the Constitution in they actually had a coffin for it. It's kind of funny. But 4 days later, the dean and the governor order out the National Guard of Ohio. They're there with the protesters, and it's not clear who does it, and it's really not important who does it. What's important is we have Americans killing Americans, and when it's all said and done, 4 students are dead, including this one. And this has become a very famous shot. So there you go. Now, after that, they called them the Kent State Four. There was a second one at Jackson State in Mississippi. What happened there was it was because of Cambodia, but it was also because the 1970 draft had a large number of African Americans, and they wanted some answers about that. And similar results. The National Guard's called out. Doesn't matter who's shot first. Somebody shot. 2 people are dead. So in a matter of a couple of weeks, at 2 college campuses, we have 6 college people dead at the hands of the National Guard. And so things are rapidly spiraling out of control here. And believe me, Nixon is not far behind that. Then we get a bombshell. Okay? In 1971, a man named Daniel Ellsberg releases the Pentagon Papers. Okay? These were top secret documents that he stole from the Pentagon. Make no mistake about it. He did steal them. He went and sold them to the New York Times, and the New York Times published them in a series. It was kind of like a new thing. This really rattles Nixon because there's a lot of stuff that the American public and President's opinion, past and current, don't want them to know. So what are the Pentagon Papers, and what came about this? The first thing is it's from Daniel Ellsberg, okay? The next thing is it reveals the presidents and the advisors and the commanders-in-chief had not been completely honest about the war. Johnson had lied about it, Nixon had lied about it, Kennedy, Eisenhower, etc. And so this increases what we call the credibility gap, where a president will say something and we go, well, we want some proof. Where's some proof about that? And this is where that happens. Now, the United States is so nervous so much that they will actually sue the New York Times over the publication of this paper because they said it is a libel. Not liable, but libel, which is L-I-B-E-L. Libel means you're using stolen material to slander somebody, okay? And so we have a major court case. Can a paper publish something they know is stolen, even if it's hurting something, and the Supreme Court uphold the newspaper. They said that if it's true and they get a hold of it, they do not have to release their sources, and they are allowed to print it. So major decision there, right? And so this is why newspapers love breaking these stories, and this is why TMZ exists, guys. TMZ follows celebrities around and try to get them to do stupid things because they're allowed to use it because it is out in public. All right? Now, the next thing we'll move into are some constitutional amendments and some different things domestically, and then lastly, we'll move into Watergate, which is all kinds of crazy.